Welcome to episode 1 of the Movement Logic podcast. I'm your host, Laurel Beaversdorf, and I'm joined by
me, your co-host, Dr. Sarah Court.
Yeah. Yay. We are going to dive right into our topic today. It's a really big one, and it's kind of like a broad brushstroke conversation, but maybe more like the canvas that's going to kind of lay out what some of our more detailed conversations in future podcast episodes will kind of revolve around. So it's a question that I think is relevant to anyone with a body, but maybe
just
more,
anyone,
yeah, anyone, anywhere, but maybe more specifically to movement professionals like me and movement and rehab professionals like Dr. Sarah Court. It's a big question, and hopefully it sparks some interesting and philosophical conversation between Sarah and I, but I guess we're going to have to wait and find out. Before we get into it, we want you to know that Sarah and I, we did decide on this topic for our conversation, but we have not had this conversation in the past. Our dialogue's not scripted. It's really just us thinking out loud. And that's kind of my favorite way to learn personally. So here's our big question. The question is, what is the difference between these three concepts? Movement, exercise, and sport. Now, those of you who practice or teach yoga, which is my guess is a good many of you who are listening, we know movement plays a really big role in the practice of yoga, but it doesn't really fit neatly into either of these or any of these three categories. It might need a category of its own. Maybe you're wondering about that. Don't worry. We are going to get into that question big time in this conversation. We have two more questions that we're going to ask around this that we've planned out as well, but more on that as we get into this topic of the difference between movement, exercise, and sport. So, cool. Sarah,
yes,
do you want to?
What's the difference?
Start us off.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably many different opinions on what these things are, what the difference is, and when I was thinking about it, the sport one sort of separated itself in my mind a little more clearly from movement and exercise. Those two seemed more grouped together. Sport to me involves competition. It involves some sort of aim outside of the movement itself, like winning. Mm-hmm. It might involve other things like a ball or a bat, which are all things that I personally really don't enjoy. This is a total aside, but I was at the clinic yesterday, and the clinic owner, who's also a practitioner, was like, "Think fast." And she threw a ball. I was looking for this ball. She threw it at me. And I literally, as she was throwing it, I went, "I hate catching." Because sport to me is the thing where you embarrass yourself. I guess that's my experience of sport from having more of a like yoga and dance background. So to me, sport has like a goal outside of the physical movement of it. And part of that difference is when I, work with athletes or people who are sporty. A lot of people think people who are sort of at a higher level of movement or sport like that they are really incredibly excellent movers. And in some ways they are. But the wild thing that I see very, very often is that because the focus is so much on this goal of, be the fastest or hit the thing the farthest or whatever the sport asks for, very often they're just kind of getting there however they get there. And the strategy, the movement strategy, the motor planning, all of that kind of stuff within their movement sometimes is bananas. I've seen some really crazy stuff where I'm like, I get it. You're really good at this, but you like almost somehow like without actually doing it the best possible way, the most efficient way. So that's sort of where I am with sport. What do you think about sport? What's your...
Well, yeah. So I think that sport is definitely the most specific of the three. Mm-hmm. I played volleyball. That was my best sport all the way through senior year of high school, and loved lots of different sports, basketball, track and field. I ran the 300-meter hurdles. I was fairly good. I was a fairly good athlete, but only in high school. And I guess, so if I were to just give you like a couple words that I identify with each of these concepts, movement, exercise, sport. When I think of movement, I think of life, or like the basis of what we're studying in physics, chemistry, and biology. Like movement is life. Also, I think about like how movement defines space and time, right? It's just so broad that when we're talking about movement, we could be talking about any number of infinite variables having to do like with microscopic and macroscopic, and like movement is in like just moving about our day. I hit the mic. Moving about our day as humans. I moved and whammed my arm into the mic. So movement's super broad. Exercise, when I think of exercise, I think of health. Something we do for health.
Yeah.
And sport, I think of competition, just like you said. I probably identify least with sport. I don't teach athletics. I'm not a competitive athlete. However, funny story, I started doing CrossFit, which has so far been something I have not been talking about a lot because I'm still trying to figure out how it fits with my identity.
Like going to CrossFit classes?
I am having an identity crisis with CrossFit. But here's the thing. I moved to Alabama from New York, and I wanted to join a gym. And I had a lot of curiosity about CrossFit, and I wanted to strength train. And I knew that that was going to be a part of CrossFit, like big time. I also wanted more aerobic exercise. And so, CrossFit has all of that. I joined this gym and I freaking love it. I love the gym. I love the people there. I mean, I don't really know them all that well, to be honest with you, but I like the vibe. Do you know how when you get a vibe from a place and you're like, this place is for me. It's for me. And I think it really plays into like my rebel thinker personality, where like, I don't like being told what to do, but I like to think really deeply about why I'm doing something. So when I choose someone to tell me what to do, I want it to be because they've thought really deeply about what they're telling me to do. So this CrossFit gym, they don't really get on me about anything. Like I can do whatever variation of whatever exercise I want. I know what I'm doing, right? And I can also go up to them and ask them for an alternative. And there's no like, no, you gotta like do more, harder, faster, better, heavier. Like if anything, they lean more toward let's start slow. Let's take it, more conservatively. So I really appreciate this particular gym, and I'm really digging CrossFit. But one of the things that's always sort of like given me a twitch about CrossFit is that they call everybody an athlete. And I'm like, well, I used to identify as an athlete. I don't anymore, but like really an athlete, like why do I have to be called an athlete?
Right.
I'm not doing this for competition, although there is this competitive aspect to CrossFit. I mean, there are CrossFit competitions. So I was talking to somebody that I'm mentoring with, Chris Beardsley, who's an exercise scientist, and he's expert in strength physiology. And I told him I was doing CrossFit. And I was like, but they call me an athlete, and I don't really think I'm an athlete. He's like, well, anything done competitively is potentially a sport. Anything done competitively. So that's actually Chris Beardsley's definition.
Right.
Well, I'm not going to, basically take his words and like set them in stone right now, but that's what was my takeaway from what he said. And anything done competitively is a sport. But then I'm like, well, I used to be competitive in the yoga classrooms that I was practicing in as a newer practitioner, and like trying to like out headstand people around me as well. So is that make yoga a sport? So I guess we could talk about like, what is competition?
Yeah.
There's like more and less official versions of competition.
I think as far as I wanted to say, this idea of like what makes an athlete, and is it necessarily equated with sport or competition? I think it can be. One of the things that I look at when I'm working with a patient as far as their rehab, their goals is, do you want to get back to XYZ sport? And I'm not as we've determined already, I'm not a sporty person, but I have to know enough about the mechanics and the kinesiology and everything around a bunch of sports that are popular, because I have to be able to help my patients rehab back to that sport or that activity. Like golf or tennis are very, very common. Running is huge. And the thing I would say about, calling you an athlete, I mean, I get it when you feel like, oh, well, that's not really who I am. I'm not in this for competition. I'm not even really in competition with myself, which maybe is another way to determine, calling yourself an athlete is like, oh, I'm trying to, best my own PR or whatever.
Right. Exactly.
But one of the, in terms of when I think about the level that I have to rehab somebody to. If I have someone who, and they're like, I run 3 or 4 times a week. I'll do a 10K on a weekend, no problem. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I'm not rehabbing this person to the level where they want to just be able to get down to the floor and play with their grandkids, or, take a gentle walk and maybe ride their bike on the weekend or something. I'm rehabbing this person to be able to perform at the level of an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not they think of themselves as one, I have to think of them as
Right.
one. So that's part of what I think of in the rehab sort of world.
Right.
As far as then defining, exercise and movement, I like what you said about exercise and health. I think of exercise different from movement in that exercise has a goal. The exercise itself is sometimes less, the exercise itself may not be the goal. The goal is health or fitness. I can never say the word fitness anymore without thinking about that meme with the pizza. Do you know that?
No.
It's like a cat sitting next to a pizza, and the cat's like, I'm really into fitness whole pizza in my mouth. And that's, so now whenever I hear the word fitness, that's all I think about. Pizza. So fitness is pizza. But yeah, exercise has a goal, right? It's and again, in the rehab space, it's like, okay, I'm going to do this corrective exercise so that I can rehab my sprained ankle so that I can go running again or something like that. Or I'm going to exercise because I have goals around my weight, or goals around my cardiovascular health, or goals around some sort of muscular hypertrophy, bodybuilding thing, or bone density, or any number of other things. So I always think of it like exercise is sort of like the thing that you're doing to get to the other thing that you want. And movement, I think it seems to me that in the world of yoga and Pilates and I think we've sort of all adopted the term movement, because it's hard to, and you and I were talking about this earlier, it's hard for me to describe what I do when I teach classes. And I think movement just allows us so much freedom to include whatever we want, that it's much easier than if I call my class a yoga class, how much of it needs to be what people think of as yoga asana,
right?
And how much of it needs to or can be other things. And at this point, it's such a mishmash, But if I call it movement, then the expectations are, well, it could be anything, and I could put whatever I want into it. So I think movement gives us a degree of freedom as teachers to include whatever we want to include in our classes.
Right. Yeah. Yoga is a combination of physical movement, spiritual practices, meditative, breath-based practices that originated in India. And so it has this like spiritual cultural component to it that I do think, it makes it so that it doesn't really fit very neatly into the categories of movement or exercise. I don't think it really belongs in sport at all.
No.
But movement is something that we do in a yoga practice, because everything is movement. But some forms of yoga are treated, I think, a bit more like exercise, right? So we're doing the asanas in order to actually put some stress on our body to facilitate changes, adaptations toward different capacities. The yoga practice is also potentially used for like decreasing or basically recovery, a form of recovery practice. If you do, for example, higher intensity exercise, strength training, things like that, on your off days, you might do a practice like yoga for the very purpose of kind of like removing the stressor and recovering, and then having all of those maybe positive effects on the nervous system and on the brain that we know are associated with things like meditation and mindfulness. So yeah, I guess my next question is, so when we're talking about movement, we could be talking about any number of things. There are certain activities that don't fit very neatly into either category fully. Let me just give you one example, like gardening. Some people call gardening exercise. They do gardening for exercise, but gardening is also kind of like one of those daily life tasks that you do to like get your plants to grow and have vegetables and things like that. Same thing with, housework could also sort of be exercise in that, like it gets you moving. There might be some physical labor involved with it that, could facilitate adaptations. I mean, honestly, like any type of movement could be taking us away from a deconditioned state. But I think what sets exercise apart is potentially that when we do exercise, we're seeking to make some kind of change to our body.
Yeah.
Now that exercise that we do, the exercise that we do could be like on a spectrum of intensities though. So like we could be doing restorative yoga as a recovery practice that actually doesn't really put very much stress at all on our bodies, but does create change, say, in our energetic state, right? So it's still creating change. The types of exercises that you might do with somebody who is just out of surgery, like rehabilitation exercises, are going to be very low effort, low intensity exercises, potentially for the average person, but for that person just out of surgery, they're going to be pretty significant. So that's another thing about, exercise, like the difficulty factor really depends on the person we're working with and like where they are. But I was going to say exercise is so broad, right? And so I think what we get a little bit confused when we're talking about exercise as movement teachers is like, what are we trying to change? Mm-hmm. What types of changes are we trying to facilitate in someone's life, and maybe more narrowly in their body, right? Mm-hmm. Because when we talk about bodies, sometimes we get kind of hung up on like the muscles and the bones and the flexibility and the strength and all that stuff. But like, honestly, the bigger changes that I think people want from exercise have more to do with their life, like how they feel in their life and how they feel as a person in their life. I think really it's the feeling they're left with. So yeah, that's absolutely what I have to say about movement, exercise, yoga. I wonder, maybe we could ask our next question.
Sure.
Okay. Next question is, what problems do we have as a society? We're in the United States, but anywhere in your society, what problems might your society, your culture have with movement? What problems might your society or culture have with exercise? And what problems might it have with sport? I'm happy to start us off with this one. So if it's real quick, like movement, maybe we don't move enough. Mm-hmm. We've outsourced movement and we call it convenience, right? We're no longer having to do like the movement that we had to do before there was delivery, internet, cars,
vacuum cleaner.
Right. Vacuum cleaner. Right. Exercise. I think that we struggle with the problem of never enough. Or also maybe not enough, like, because maybe the daily movements of our lives aren't stressing our bodies enough to leave us with the resilience and robustness that we need to be pain-free and to feel good. But exercise also has this, like the pendulum swings pretty widely, and we have a problem with exercise where it's just never enough. So in yoga, you're never aligned enough. You're never doing fancy enough poses. Strength training, it's never heavy enough. Aerobic exercise, you're never fast enough or running long enough, right? And then with sport, similar to exercise, we have an issue maybe with overtraining, right? Mm-hmm. And a lack of variability where we're only training for our sport, and then we end up with pain as a result of that. Variability is really important, for keeping us feeling good. But with sport, in terms of our culture and society, I actually feel like there's just such an outsized emphasis on sport that it drives the financing of so much research, that who's being researched are like college athletes or like elite athletes a lot of the time. Well, actually it's like, it seems like it's either swinging between like absolute beginners who are completely untrained, say, for example, if it's like a research about strength, or we're conducting this study in order to get an answer to a question that would be relevant to athletics or sport.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I feel like that leaves so many people out from, the evidence being able to help potentially steer movement education for the average, 55-year-old woman, for example. There's not a whole lot of studies on like strength for 55-year-old women.
No,
from my perspective, which is limited.
If I read another study that starts with that is like methods, 18 college level athletes, I'm always just like, oh, okay, great. So
Yeah,
this
but
is
that's where
great
the
for
money
my
is.
18 to 25-year-olds. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think, to go back, as you were talking, like had so many things just sort of pinging in my head.
Mm.
I think absolutely one of the biggest issues that we have in this country is with people just not moving enough generally.
Mhm.
I can't tell you the number of patients who come in and they're like, I sit at my computer 10 hours a day. And I'm like, when do you get up? And they're like, once,
Yeah.
and so we see these repetitive stressors on the body from posture. Not that there's a necessarily, perfect posture to be in, but lack of, to your point, variability in posture, lack of
Mhm.
movement in, I'm going to give you a term, ADLs. ADLs are activities of daily living. It's one
Mm.
of my fancy physical therapy note writing
It's a good
shorthand.
one.
And that means that is, cleaning the house and going to the
Mhm.
store and all that kind of stuff.
It's a
And
type of movement.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, I could push the vacuum cleaner around, or I could press the button on my little robot and my robot could run around the house and vacuum the floor instead, right? I could,
I want a
I
Roomba
could,
so bad. I want a Roomba
I
so bad.
mean,
They're like $800 though, aren't they?
no, 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 no. They're like
200.
200. Yeah, yeah. I
Oh,
mean, if you don't have to
they've
get
gotten
the,
cheaper.
well, it's the best. I do love it. You have to name it.
Oh,
Mine's
you have
named,
a Roomba?
I have it's not a Roomba, but it's like a off brand or whatever. His name's Kevin. Uh,
Oh,
so, you have to name them because that's just a rule.
yeah.
That's a rule of the robot vacuum.
Okay.
Um,
Kevin.
but,
We have an
but yeah,
owl outside our house. We named it Steve.
nice.
Think of naming things.
I have an imaginary raccoon, not a real one, in my basement, and his name's Richard. I just promise it's true. I'm afraid he's going to come up through the vents with his little hands and just wrap them around the fence and be like, hello. Anyway,
Wow.
but yeah, we drive to the store because we can load up the car instead of walking,
yeah.
where I live, at least, instead of walking
Well, I
3
live
blocks.
where
Yeah,
I live now in Alabama. It's like
right.
life changing. It's amazing. I love it. I never want to go back to schlepping my groceries again because I used to live in New York City where grocery shopping before the pandemic, when everything became like delivered to your door, but grocery shopping was like a sport. It was more like a sport.
I remember when I lived there, walking up my 3 flights of stairs with bags of groceries and just being like, okay, well, here's my workout for the day.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, we've outsourced a lot of it. And even, I mean, you can get very sort of micro with this as well and talk about things like the amount of foods that are available that are pre-chopped. So
Right.
people aren't chopping vegetables.
Right.
That your jaw strength is different because you're not biting into an apple, you're eating apple slices, things like that.
Yeah.
So from a sort of micro to macro level, we have really removed a lot of the kind of daily exercise that previously was helping with overall fitness, with bone density, with fatigue, with sleeping better, all of these other things. And I think what has happened now is we sort of have turned exercise into punishment for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, well, because of my lifestyle now, I have to do these, 6 exercises today that Sarah gave me as homework, but I don't enjoy it. And it's like, oh, I got to find time to put this in. And it becomes like a whole thing for a lot of people.
Right.
And the number of people that I see when I'll be like, okay, how's it going with the stuff we're giving you at home? And they're like, I kind of did it once, because it becomes like another chore, right? So we start to think of exercise as a chore, as opposed to, in and of itself, something to enjoy.
And I'll say that I think that's where sport is really helpful because I feel like people who are training, so exercise becomes training when you're an athlete, right? So
absolutely,
even the change in term tells you that I am doing this exercise in
with a goal,
for a very specific reason, and for in pursuit of mastery, which is incredibly fulfilling when we can be working on getting better at something that we really enjoy and care about. So anyway,
absolutely, yeah, and that's also something we sort of stress a lot in the rehab world, which is if I don't give you a reason to do this exercise at home, you're just going to be like, I'm not enjoying this. But if I give you a reason, if I connect it to the thing that you want to get back to, right? So you want to increase your range of motion in your shoulder so you can do your tennis swing again post, I don't know, labral repair, let's say something like that. So every then piece of homework that I'm giving you to do, or even calling it homework, right? I need a better term for it, but every piece of exercise that I give you to do, if I can connect it for you to that goal, you're so much more likely to want to do it and then to actually do it, because it's not just this sort of standalone, like, oh, I'm flossing my teeth again, kind of a thing. So I think that's a big piece of it. And, ultimately, I think a lot of adults, at least, start to think about sport as something they did when they were younger, and it is no longer for them a lot of the time. Or it's, oh, I tried to get back into soccer and I injured my ankle because I haven't played soccer in 20 years, but I played it in school, and then things like that. So figuring out a word in between exercise and sport, maybe, where there's something like I really enjoy hiking. There's tons of beautiful hiking trails in and around Los Angeles, which you will come and see.
Yes.
But my friend Alex and I will go on like a 6-mile hike. That's exhausting. Is that exercise? Is that sport? Is that movement? It's kind of all three, because I'm not in competition with somebody about it, but I'm a little bit in competition with myself and with each other. We time it every time, and we try to see how long did it take, so we're like, oh, wow, we shaved 10 minutes off of that hike,
Yeah.
So, I think the ideal scenario is some sort of Venn diagram where the middle of like movement, exercise, and sport, where the middle is like where you want to hang out. And so what are the things that motivate you? What do you get excited about? And how does your movement and exercise lead you towards that activity?
Well, can I say something? I'm training for a muscle up right now. So in addition to doing CrossFit, where like there's lots of muscle ups in CrossFit and I can't do them. So I hired a personal trainer who is really smart, and he's doing remote personal training with me. And so this idea of like, what is the in between exercise and sport? I feel like my muscle up training is that. CrossFit's exercise. It's very general, but this muscle up training is much more specific. And so all of the programming that he's doing for me is really taking me very specifically in the direction of being able to do a muscle up. And so we're training specific exercises with specific training parameters for that purpose. And so, yes, it's exercise. I consider my training, I call it training, right, as exercise, but it is progressive and targeted to take me toward this goal that is not a sport. I'm not in competition, but I am writing down my numbers every day, tracking my parameters. And I definitely have an eye on improvement. I definitely have an eye on progress. And I feel like that might be what is missing from people who, for example, go from sitting at their desk all day and then decide they want to take up basketball, right? That might be that type of progressive overload and specific, loading might be the answer to that problem. But that's a form of exercise, but it's a more specific approach to exercise, which is what I actually love so much about strength training, is the goal orientation of it that you can have. You don't have to have. CrossFit, like I said, is much more general. It's a much more general type of resistance training and strength training. But the type of work you could be doing to prepare yourself or prepare your student or prepare your patient for this more specific type of demand, strength training kind of is able to do that in a way that I haven't really understood other modalities is capable of doing, except I guess like we could kind of take a little bit of a tangent here and talk about dance, right? We could talk about another type of performance, which is artistic performance. You and I both have an artistic background. I was an actor, but I had some movement proclivities in my acting. I was much more of a movement-based actor. I keep hitting the mic. Sorry. I was much more of a movement-based actor. And you're a former dancer. a performer, right?
Yeah. Well, not in any sort of professional capacity, but I did it a lot. And I also did some of my own acting, although it was all really in commercials. So I could act at quotation marks around acting because it's a lot of just, hold the product, smile and say something dumb. So for whatever reason, I was the exact level of corny to be able to do that with a straight face.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I think that what's interesting to me about artistic forms of movement that honestly I think is missing really from our conversation so far is the cathartic aspect of moving for the purpose of self-expression or movement for the purpose of expression. So, and this is where I want to bring back yoga, where I think that yoga is just walking this really interesting line as a modality because it can kind of hold space for movement, exercise. I don't really associate it that much with sport, but it definitely could be a nice complement to sport, right? But movement and exercise. But then there's also this like self-expressive aspect of yoga where the focus is less on performance and more, it can be less on performance or even the doing and more on the feeling and the attunement. And then from there, taking that level of self-awareness, that level of interoception, the ability to like pay attention to what we're feeling on the inside and turn that into an expression of movement for the sake of expressing movement. And this is where yoga, I think, is so unique because it really can be done. Of course, everyone's doing yoga for their own reason, but yoga can be done just for the sake of it, right? Like I'm really not trying to do anything. I'm trying to be with myself right now.
Yeah. Yoga is, it's different, as you said, it's different things in different people. It's taught and practiced in so many different ways now that I think it can be hard to find a single kind of definition of it. But I do think I agree with you at its core. It is a practice of being with yourself in yourself and not doom scrolling or distracting ourselves from the present moment, or it's so much about being in your body in the moment and being okay with whatever comes up. And which is different to me than the idea of exercise, right? It doesn't, to your point, it doesn't have a goal outside of itself necessarily. It exists as its own goal. The practice is the goal. So that sort of categorizes it differently than doing exercise or sport. But sometimes the practice of yoga does not involve that much movement, right? Sometimes it's about a non-moving, right? It's the practice of meditation, the practice of sitting, the practice of quietude. And, it's such a phenomenal gift, and I love it. My own yoga practice has changed so much over the years, and I'm sure yours has as well. In the beginning, I was, much younger. And so very much into the like, oh, look at how well I do this pose in the middle of the room. And everyone's like, oh, good job. And now it probably looks, if the 25-year-old me practicing yoga saw what I was doing now, I would probably be like, what is this feeble old lady yoga that you're doing? Where's the like 15 headstands and the like, crazy balance poses and all the things that actually I over practiced and ended up injuring myself from. But I think with some age comes hopefully a little bit of wisdom and some understanding that you can look back and say, okay, well, what was I using the practice for at that point? And were my goals different? I don't necessarily want to say better or worse, but how have my goals for my practice of yoga changed, and how has my practice of yoga changed to reflect those goals?
Well, yeah. And you're making me think of one of the problems that I feel like arises for me when I consider the concept of exercise is this never enough mentality that I feel was much more prevalent in me as a younger practitioner, where at first it was never fancy enough. Like, what's the hardest pose I can do? And then it was never aligned enough. And then I started to have pain associated, at least in part from my practice, but it might have just been because that was the only practice that I had. I wasn't doing other forms of exercise. I wasn't doing other types of movement for the purpose of health, right? I was just doing yoga for all of my health. And I started to have pain, and I started to recognize that actually maybe I needed to do some different type of exercise. I started strength training. And because the effort and intensity of strength training is much, much higher than yoga, I had underwent kind of an identity crisis of sorts, where I was like, oh, I'm working so hard. I am not used to working this hard. And in fact, in the yoga practice, the sort of direction, the trajectory that I thought I was on was to make everything feel easier and effortless, right? Like the path toward effortlessness, right? And so strength training was this very interesting challenge to my identity of like what I thought I was trying to do with my body, but then also kind of just spoke for itself in terms of how much better I felt after I started doing it, that I was like, well, there's something to this. I'm going to keep doing it. And so the never enough, though, of strength training, I think is often to just try to like get stronger and stronger and stronger. And maybe as a result, overload in the sense of like, injuring ourselves, or maybe not having enough recovery built into our training. As a 41-year-old woman, I don't notice myself suffering from that never enough mentality as much as I did when I was 25.
Absolutely.
So the other thing that I would run as well as a 25-year-old for the purpose of losing weight and looking a certain way, which I think is another never enough problem with exercise, which is that I don't think enough people are exercising to feel good. I think they're exercising to change the way they look. Yeah. Which is not helping them feel better, actually. It's like sort of, at least I'll speak from my perspective as a 25-year-old trying to become thinner and thinner and thinner, that definitely running for the purpose of losing weight, that reasoning for my running wasn't helping me feel better. However, the running in and of itself, the endorphins, the aerobic capacity I was building from it was certainly having positive influence. But it could have easily become something that was unhealthy. And so when we're doing exercise for health, we have to be careful that our approach isn't actually creating the opposite effect of it becoming unhealthy. And I think that that's true for sport as well.
Yeah, I think you can, and there's plenty of people that I don't see it as much anymore, but I still do see sometimes where they've injured themselves during their yoga practice. And I say, well, how many times a week are you practicing yoga? Every day. Right. Is there any day where you're not doing that? No. Is there any day where you're doing something different? No. Yeah. So, anything can become a problem if it's done for the wrong reasons, or if it's done in an unhealthy manner. We can addict ourselves to anything, right? We can addict ourselves to the feeling of being the person who does yoga every day, right? So there's so many ways, but I think ultimately, sort of big picture for us culturally, is that we need to land somewhere in the middle. We need to figure out how to stop sort of some parts of the population who are, overusing, abusing, overdoing whatever sport or activity or exercise. And we have to talk to the parts of the population that are doing not enough or nothing for no reason other than they're out of the habit of it. It was never encouraged. It was never emphasized. And now they're finding themselves in pain or having problems because of that. And honestly, I do a lot of education in the clinic around, yes, we can make your back feel better if you do some movement, and how much people have become scared of movement because now things hurt, right? I think we need to take sort of both ends of the spectrum and kind of try to point them more into the middle, where you live in a space of, practicing whatever your sport is for fun, understanding your exercise or training as a way to help you do the thing that you like, the joy of just being in a body, and the ability to move a body, and the privilege of having a body that functions relatively well, right? And to, enjoy it a little more. I think with
Yes.
a lot of these things, we're in American culture in particular, I think we're very good at turning everything into work. So suddenly
Yeah.
the sport becomes a work, the exercise becomes work,
Yeah.
right? You're like, well, from 8 to 9 is when I, achieve enlightenment. And then at 9, I have a Zoom meeting and, and it's just,
And I've got to turn my yoga practice into a reel for Instagram.
right, exactly. So did it even, hey, if nobody ever saw it, if you
Yeah.
didn't record it, did it
Right.
even happen? Yeah.
Right. And the yoga practice took 30 minutes and making the reel took 5 hours.
Right. And the making of the
Getting
reel
real.
undid any benefit of the yoga practice
Oh
because
my God.
after hour 5, you're ready to throw your phone across the room.
1,000 times over.
So I think we need to come to sort of this middle ground of understanding that we all need to be probably moving more than we are on a daily basis, not turning it into punishment, not turning it into overuse, not turning towards medication as the automatic fix. Or surgery, which I see a lot of, and understanding that a lot of the research now actually is saying, the surgery is not going to fix the problem that you have.
Right.
So, I mean, obviously in many cases, I've had plenty of surgery, so I'm not anti-surgery, but in a lot of cases, like low back pain, for example, there's a lot of studies where it's like, you can go ahead and have that low back surgery and you're still going to have your pain. So,
yeah,
a lot of education around both ends of the spectrum, I think.
Yeah. I think the question is usually, where's the money at? Right. That's why
the money's in the drugs.
The money's in the drugs, the money's in the surgery, the money's in the drugs. But then the money for example, this topic of sport being sort of the problem in our culture and society with sport is that there's such a hyper focus. It's such a priority in terms of like the collection of knowledge, like epistemologically, like we want to know as much as possible about performance in sport. But why don't we also want to know as much as possible about perimenopausal women? And why don't we also want to know as much as possible about postnatal recovery, pelvic floor health? Why don't we want to know as much as possible about, these other topics for the majority of the population who are not elite athletes? I'm getting worked up about it.
You are. And Laurel, the answer is, why not? Because the patriarchy.
Right.
Because all of those topics are about women for the most part. Pelvic floor health is for both.
Yeah.
But mostly the people who come in are women.
Yeah, and all the money in sports is with the male athletes. And okay, we could go into why that is, and I think I could probably argue both sides, but I would love for there to be more research that will yield information relevant to the vast majority of human beings on this earth, and less about the small minority of human beings on this earth that happen to be really, really good at one thing. Our final question around the original question is, what are we doing, you and I? What is Movement Logic doing? And what's our aim? What's our mission as it relates to the topics of movement, exercise, and sport?
Yeah.
You want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
What's our mission? Well, Movement Logic is for everybody, but it is also sort of more aimed at teachers. So any teacher of movement, Pilates, yoga, strength coaches, personal trainers, physical therapists, and as such, it tries to, what we're trying to do is create content that takes the knowledge that you have and just levels it up and gives you more background to what you might have learned in your sort of initial trainings or over the years of your work. And we mostly try to do that with, with a lot of exercises, for want of a better word, movements. Now that we've had this conversation, I'm like, I don't know, is it movement or is it exercise?
I don't know.
Examples of ways that you can start to create novel movement variability for the yoga population in particular, including strength into the work that you're doing, because that is a piece, yes, there is strengthening components to yoga, but that external load is missing unless you're doing yoga with weights,
right?
Which then sort of gets into that weird hybrid world. But anyway, that to me, that's the goal is it's the sort of, teach a person to fish
Mhm.
rather than just like handing out fish. So
Right.
I love getting to work in my role as a teacher separately from my role as a clinician, because clinician, it's sort of one-to-one, and
Mm.
teacher, I feel like, well, if I just taught 15 different people something about this, they then go out and work with how many of their students and clients. So um, really, I mean, just a lot of movement education,
Mm.
which that's, to me, that's the goal. What about
Cool.
you? What do you think?
Well, I'm going to talk about what my mission is as a yoga teacher, strength coach, or just movement educator, which is, well, I'm doing it right now, right? Starting conversations to get us thinking a little bit deeper about what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. But in the realms of like my actual movement teaching, I think I'm always trying to think about how I want students, what I want them to leave with beyond just the feeling and maybe the outcome of having done the yoga class or the strength program or the kettlebell class with me. I'm thinking about how I want them to see themselves. And so this means that I'm trying to create opportunities for people through movement to have a fresh perspective on themselves and to start to imagine potentially what else could be possible in their life because of how they feel now. So I guess I'm dealing in feelings, right? I'm dealing in like these more positive, hopefully, feelings of greater capacity, better breathing, more strength, maybe more flexibility, maybe the ability to do something they had not been able to do before, whether it's a yoga pose or a pull-up or a kettlebell flow. But underneath that, I guess I want people to ask and to believe, right? What else is possible? There's more possible for me in my life. I'm capable of more, not in terms of more work or better performance or this or that, but like maybe I'm capable of feeling more present in my life, better in my body, more capable to take on the challenges that are inherent to being in a body and to living in this world.
Yeah. I have a follow-up question for you. Do
Yeah.
you think differently in terms of, because I know that I do in my head, I sort of think about what I call lovingly Gen Pop, which is anyone who's not a teacher, and then the teacher community, which is anyone who teaches anything. Do you think differently in terms of who you're creating content for? Do you have different goals when you're teaching like a public workshop that's for, regular folks versus I'm, teaching in part of a teacher training or something like that?
I think what I've noticed about myself is that in order for me to be an effective teacher, I can really only be teaching what I'm truly invested in and interested in and believe in.
Mm-hmm.
And what tends to be the outcome of that is that I do attract a lot of teachers because I think that my perspective is usually coming from this more like this level of understanding that's a little bit maybe deeper and therefore not as relevant to the general population. However, I do have people who are non-teachers who take classes with me or members of my virtual studio. And I think what sets them apart is that they're really curious to understand these finer details and sort of the connections between things. My multidisciplinary approach is because like I teach strength, I teach yoga, I teach very down-regulating and very up-regulating practices together as a part of my work. My reasoning behind that is that I do think if we think of movement as a kind of nutrition for our bodies, that we need all the different food groups, we need all the different movement groups for balance. And I feel like that's my way of kind of taking that middle road of like, let's find balance here. And for me, balance means a lot of times it means variety. Of course, we could go to the extreme with that as well. Like too much variety actually starts to kind of work against you, I think, because we can't really then make progress in any particular direction. We dig a lot of shallow holes and we fail to dig any deep ones. So I don't think that the answer is to be doing something different every day, but I do think that variety might attempt to bring more variety to our movement diet, movement practice. Katie Bowman was the first person who used that phrase that is just like such an adequate analogy. I think it's such a good analogy. But our movement diet, I think we can start bringing more balance to it when we seek very different avenues of movement along a wide spectrum, from low effort to high effort, from low intensity to high intensity. And we have some variety within that spectrum. So my goal really is to help people ask the question, what else is possible in their life? Like, that's the big one. And I do it through movement, and I do it by helping people take a more reasonable, balanced approach to their movement, to open their mind to the possibility that they can feel very differently. And all of those ways of feeling can be good simply by exposing themselves to different ways. I keep hitting the mic. Different ways of hitting the microphone and moving.
You need to gesture less with your arms when you're talking.
You can always tell I'm fired up about
variability. You need variability in where you're putting your hands when you're talking. No, I think that's really great. And I think that ultimately, like, that's a great goal for all of us as teachers, right? Is to help people understand where they might have self-limited, or where they might, and it can happen in a teacher, teacher to teacher. It can happen, teacher to client, student, patient. I mean, I see a lot of people where they'll come in, they're like, oh, I say, okay, what is there something you'd like? I usually ask people, is there something you'd like to be doing that you're not doing right now because of how your body feels? And some people are very clear. They're like, I'm going to get back to my thing. And other people are like, oh, well, I used to love but I haven't done it in years. And I don't think I could ever do it again. And I'm always like just super positive about it. I'm like, well, let's see. I think maybe you could, or maybe a version of it,
Right.
maybe a variation on it, something. And I think that's the sort of concept of taking your embodiment and your movement and your exercise and your sport out of the realm of it's a chore, it's not fun, it's something I used to do, it's become stagnant, I only ever do the same things anymore, and instead kind of just throwing a bath bomb of inspiration in, so that somebody starts to think, oh, and this is also, I mean, this is a totally separate topic, but it's also like really important for like nociception and interoception and
what's nociception, Sarah?
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, pardon me. Nociception is your body's sense of like noxious, negative things. It is the precursor to what we consider the experience of pain.
Right.
So that, having negative thoughts around your own capabilities, around what movement's going to feel like, has been shown in research to actually decrease your ability for like motor output, strength, things like that, and increase your sense of pain.
Right.
But if we start to flip it, if we start to put ideas back into people's heads around what they can do with their body, then anything's possible. Anything's possible.
So I want to add also to like my answer to the question of what's my mission is like, what do I see Movement Logic's mission as? And I really think that for me, the reason that Movement Logic exists is to help movement teachers like me who are not necessarily, or not at all, actually, like officially not a PT. I am not a PT. Like that's a very objective statement that I can make. I am not a PT. I am not a clinician. I am not a rehab specialist. However, I do have tools to help people get back to meaningful activities. I do have tools to help people feel better in their body. I do have tools to help people improve their movement, their exercise, and their sport as a movement teacher. But what I need and what I've been helping us at Movement Logic put forth is a course, content that helps movement teachers understand topics of pain, anatomy, physiology, as they relate to the particular types of students they might be encountering who are post-rehab, right? We're not teaching rehab.
Okay.
they're post-rehab, but they need some more bridging. They need some more help getting back to those activities of daily living, those meaningful activities, that exercise that they really, love for their physical and mental health, that sport that they really want to get back to. Where do we fit in? Because I feel like, unfortunately, there just isn't enough bridging between rehab and then getting people back to the things that they want to be able to do in their life that give their life meaning. And I think this is really where the movement teacher comes in.
Absolutely.
The PT sessions end, and then what?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a potent space, and it's a valuable space, and it's a space that I think all of us who consider ourselves movement teachers should want to try to inhabit, if only for your own skill set, your own mastery of movement itself, right? I mean,
right.
That's kind of the goal, I think.
Yeah. We want to help people. And I think that our tutorials help people like me, movement teachers who, are PTs, help their people.
Yeah.
Hey, Sarah, I think we did it. I think we just recorded our first podcast. It's amazing.
I think you're right.
High five. Don't hit the microphone.
Don't hit the mic. High five to the camera.
Air five to the
screen. No, I hit I got to do it again. Sorry.
Okay.
Here, slow motion high five to the screen.
Okay. Whoop. Okay. Yes. All right. Well, talk to you next week.
All right.
Okay. Sounds
Bye.
good. Bye.